Hello again, everyone. I'm Tom Nagorski, managing editor at the Cipher Brief. We're talking again today about President Trump's comments about Gaza made at the White House on Tuesday. I say again because this is a hot topic, as they say, and we've had other conversations today on the site about this. Speaking now with Cipher Brief expert, longtime expert in terrorism, Bruce Hoffman, who, among other things, chaired a post 9/11 commission on terrorism and radicalization. And we come to you, Bruce, because there have been those who suggest that whatever happens or doesn't happen with some of the things President Trump was talking about, that it may be an issue or a driving force for jihadists looking to recruit. And just for those who haven't seen, and that's probably not that many people, or heard the remarks, just to review a couple, and maybe we can get your just first blush reaction to them. The president, again, sitting alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu, said that the United States should take what he called a long-term ownership position in Gaza, that the U.S. would do so to help rebuild Gaza, that its population of nearly 2 million people would be moved. He actually was asked and said permanently. Let me stop there, and if you can share, what you thought. You've watched this region for so long. What was your first blush reaction?
My first blush reaction was that just about every U.S. president this century has tried to extricate the United States from the Middle East. And this seemed to be almost calling to go in the opposite direction for almost certainly a permanent entanglement, given the broad contours of how the president described his plan yesterday. More to the point, though, what struck me really is that for months now, the Israeli Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, probably Prime Minister Netanyahu's closest confidant, has been arguing quite cogently, I think, that there were three steps that are needed to happen in Gaza. Demilitarization, which you could argue has largely been accomplished, but is still incomplete because certainly the meretricious display of Hamas fighters, adorned in black and driving brand new pickups and all having, very well polished and oiled semi-automatic weapons and so on, shows that the demilitarization has progressed but is not complete. He then said that Gaza had to be de-radicalized. And then once those first two steps or phases were accomplished, then it could be developed. So listening to the president yesterday, I thought we almost jumped to the third and left out certainly the middle one, but the first one that is only partially completed. And certainly everyone wants to develop Gaza and to reverse the really unmitigated damage and destruction that we've seen over the past 16 months. But to do so, I think everyone agrees, too, there has to be security. And in the 21st century, depopulating 140 miles square area with 2 million people is just not going to happen. Admittedly, historically, at the end of World War I, Turkey cleansed its lands of 1.6 million Greeks. Certainly in 1947, with the creation of Pakistan and India, the partition of the old Raj, there were tremendous population transfers. But in my view, that's an historical artifact that would be very difficult to resurrect in this century for exactly the reasons that we hear, unless it were voluntary. And maybe conceivably there are people that might be persuaded to relocate elsewhere, although given the Palestinians' fraught history, I don't think that's terribly likely that it would be a majority of them. And basically at the point of whose guns or whose bayonets is Gaza going to be depopulated? I mean, this is something that is very, very difficult to contemplate.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
You mentioned the past presidents who, just loath to get the United States military engaged. It's interesting because few candidates have run more strongly on the notion of extricating the United States military from, in general terms, all manner of foreign entanglements than Donald Trump did. So it's kind of, I think we were all surprised to hear, an acknowledgement that if this were to come to pass, that the American military might actually be boots on the ground in Gaza.
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right, especially at a time when I think most Americans would hear, whether rightly or wrongly, that the 2,000 or so, that very modest commitment of U.S. troops in Syria were likely to be withdrawn under a Trump administration. And this, as I said, seems to be the president's ideas about Gaza seem to be going in the exact opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to make is there's clearly a new status quo in the Middle East. That region is completely different than it was 16 months ago on October 6, 2023. And I think one thing the president was arguing in his inimitable way of often being a provocateur, of putting out things that we don't know if he's actually committed to, but he's looking for something. Maybe he's stating Z and starting from A and not looking for Y, maybe looking for N or M, for example. We don't know where that gradation is. But the point is, I think he was, though, reflecting some, facts on the ground, as it were, that the status quo has changed and there can't be a return to the status quo ante. Israel is not going to tolerate a Gaza run by Hamas existing any longer on its border. So that's, I think, one point. And as I said earlier, the demilitarization part of Minister Dermer's formulation still hasn't been completely achieved either before we even get to de-radicalization and development. Secondly, Gaza has been reduced to rubble. It's how you rebuild that. The president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, has said it would take 10 to 15 years. I'm not sure if that's necessarily accurate, but he's probably not off by very much. So in practical terms, how do you rebuild Gaza? I would argue there has to be some security guarantees or commitments that it can bring in U.S. partners. And that really is to me what's missing from what the president said yesterday. The United States cannot impose its will on the Middle East. And whenever it is attempted to do so, especially unilaterally, it's ended disastrously. If there is going to be this future vision for Gaza, it can only be undertaken in concert with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey as well. And these are all close friends and allies of the United States. But especially an issue as complex and complicated as Gaza cannot be solved by the U.S. alone or by a presidential order. It really has to be undertaken in consultation with our allies. And they're not going to come involved unless they're assured of the security
right
or enable development.
Bruce, you used the word provocateur a moment ago, which I think certainly fits, and Mr. Trump's closest allies wouldn't argue with you, I don't think. In many aspects of policy in his first term, and we're seeing it again now, that is the approach, to just try something that's super out of the box, maybe, not traditional. Who cares what the experts say? Take your pick. And in some cases, your A to Z example is interesting too, because it does sometimes, it says the thing Z that seems really out there, but you get to, I don't know, S or T, pick your letter of the alphabet.
Or maybe, yeah.
But from your perspective of worrying about radicalization and terrorist groups and so forth, is there a problem here or not with simply saying what he said, even if it's going nowhere near Z or pick your letter? In other words, he was saying some things, take over, move all these people out, that some are arguing are very dangerous just in the utterance of those words by an American president. Do you buy that?
Well, I don't think America's enemies need any more reasons to attack us. See the upsurge, for instance, in ISIS attacks over the past year, and especially attacks by ISIS-K, which was a few years ago just its most inconsequential amongst the more inconsequential branches that has become now one capable of acting on a global canvas. There's no shortage of reasons to attack the United States. I think that on the one hand, the president recognizing that for there to be progress, we have to break the stranglehold that Hamas has over the Palestinian people in Gaza, for peace to be achieved, that this was reflective of putting out one idea to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
I think commendably, he's saying that there is a new status quo in the Middle East. How can we build from that? But I still would argue, for the reasons I just described, Minister Dermer has laid out a three-phase, very convincing three-phase process that we're not even done with the first phase, so I don't see how we can leapfrog to the third. And then secondly, the United States can act independently. I mean, that would, of course, just as you described, be like waving a red flag to radicals if this was just a U.S.-imposed plan. The only thing that will work in the Middle East is the consent, firstly, of the Palestinian people themselves about their future, but firstly, the consent of our most important friends and allies and the most powerful regional states who have an influence and have a stake in what's happening. And that's what's missing right now.
So that leads me to maybe one last question, Bruce, which involves perhaps the most powerful of those states. I don't know if it's who you had in mind, but the Saudis. And here again, it's interesting because Donald Trump, I think it's fair to say, had a very strong relationship with Saudi Arabia in his first term, perhaps as a private citizen also, I don't know. A lot of talk that he was interested in finally bringing the Saudi-Israeli partnership to fruition. But surely what he said, at least, is not music to anybody's ears in Riyadh. How do you square those things? And to your earlier point, how important is it to have the Saudis on board with whatever is coming next?
No, it's absolutely crucial and essential. And I mean, even for Israel, Saudi recognition is the prize that Israel is prepared to make a variety of concessions about, because it is so important. In the president's style, it was probably to provoke deeper thinking on this issue, perhaps going back years ago to when the Abraham Accords were also viewed as something that was pie in the sky, that could never be realized. Well, not only were they achieved with four key actors in the region, but most especially United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, for example, as well as Sudan and Morocco. But on the eve of October 7th, it seemed that it was in reach that Saudi Arabia might join them. And that all seemed like, a Herculean task, an impossible task years ago. But the Abraham Accords have held. I mean, none of those countries have defected or diverted from it. Even despite the horrific events of the past 16 months, it's remained intact. So I think Saudi Arabia remains absolutely a key player, because this was, of course, one of the central foreign policy accomplishments of the first Trump administration. It would be the cornerstone of a second administration. So, of course, what they're enormously important, and what they have to say is listened to in Washington. But again, given this president, I think he is planting the seed. He is making the statement that there's a new status quo, and that we have to now divine how to achieve that, and how to achieve that in a way that allows the Palestinians to live in dignity, that respects their rights, but also guarantees Israel its security. And when you face it, many of the other proposals and projects haven't gone anywhere. This, I think, is the president's attempt to think outside of the box, to push the envelope, and to provoke other people into coming up with their own plans that probably might be more realistic and even better than his. But they're not going to do so, with, at least I would intuit, without him prodding and provoking them to do so.
So really the last question then, you said, rightly so, nothing else has really worked. Do you think this will?
On the face of it from yesterday, no, because I think it's fantastical for all the reasons that many people have said. But I'm willing to suspend disbelief or be optimistic that this could conceivably set in motion a chain of events in a linear way, but that goes in a different direction, or takes a different fork in the road, and that could further on stimulate the kind of thinking and discussion that does produce a much more workable and conceivable plan.
All right, we'll leave it there. Bruce Hoffman, as always, great to have your insights, and thanks for being with us at the Cipher Brief. Thanks again.